Hello and welcome to our weekly LinkedIn Live leadership series, Voices of Leadership. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Eastwood, the founder and CEO of Equals Y and the host of this show. Each week, we explore the fascinating world of leadership, featuring voices from various generations, functions, locations, etc. Because a team's job is to deliver results. It's the responsibility of the leader to empower, inspire, and enable the people in the team to deliver on those results. And there's actually a repeatable formula and a system for human first leadership. And that is the E3 leadership code: express plus engage plus execute, powered by emotional qualities. And how each leader chooses to show up is different. And that's the beauty of leadership, is really knowing yourself and showing up how you want to. So this is meant to be a very interactive session. So please feel free to introduce yourself, network with your other colleagues in the chat, and we will be taking questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask them, and we will try to get to all of them. So today's guest is someone whose presence alone invites people to slow down, listen inward, and reconnect with themselves. Nigel Franklyn is a previous guest. Nigel, welcome so much. I'm so excited to have you. Nigel is not just a great friend, but he's also my weekly sparring partner. We challenge each other about all things leadership and getting stuff done. What is it, about 6 years now? Is it 6?
6 years, 2019.
Wow. Every week we talk, and so I love having you on, allowing people to have this insight into these conversations, so they know. So for those that don't know Nigel, he is the founder of Me Inc. and a chief financial officer. He's also a certified EQI practitioner who brings mind, body, and spirit together to help individuals and teams understand themselves at a deeper level. His work reminds us that emotional intelligence is the foundation for how we show up, build trust, and move people forward towards meaningful action. So, Nigel, I barely even did an introduction for those that don't know you. Why don't you tell us about your journey and your leadership journey, and what's really drawn you to the emotional intelligence element about, leadership and how that shows up?
Thank you, Mrs. Eastwood. It's a pleasure to be on with you again. This is always, you're one of my favorite people to talk to. Today, I'm excited because this is probably the first time we're actually going to go deeper into the emotional intelligence conversation, right? We talk about a lot about the qualities, the traits, but not the how you get to the self-awareness, which is kind of the part of this conversation that I'm very passionate about. So I'll give you maybe my background a little bit so people can translate me as we go through this conversation, right? So a former college athlete, first generation college grad. I still remember my best friend Kern gave me my first discussion, I guess you will, when I was onboarding or going into my first corporate role, which was bring your notebook with you. Bring a notebook with you. Always ask to help. Be the last one to leave the office. So I feel like I've started from way behind in this corporate game, if you will. But as I moved through it, I realized that there are so many skills that I've gained earlier in life as a former college athlete, being curious, that I was always willing to find a way forward, find a way to improve how I would show up or better understand people, better understand their motivations. And so I think I started on that journey of always trying to find information to be a little bit better. The change for me, the most significant change for me, happened around 2014 or so. I think it was the first time in life where I got to a point where my sheer determination to move ahead wasn't going to be the solution anymore, right? I think I was going through a divorce, just changed new jobs, and I was still trying to do everything the way that I was doing it, but probably not doing it as well as I should have. At the time, I was also training for triathlons, and I wasn't interested in competing with everyone else because I just knew that I was doing things for me, right? So if I am the center of my world, and if I could manage things for me, if I can show up well for me, it would impact how others receive me. And so I wasn't about competing with anyone. I wanted to learn from people. And I was trying to put myself in many situations where I'd learn more about myself, learn more about the human condition. And my coach then at the time, Coach David Limscomb, he presented, cycling coach, he wanted me to figure out what motivated me. I must say that I don't talk about, when I say motivated me, I won the Division III national championship in the triple jump, a couple of things in college. But what I realized was if I led with the things that I've done before, a lot of people would find me arrogant, but not realizing that in my head, I'm like, no, I earned it. I worked for it. And that's just part of who I am. It's what I stand on, right? It's the confidence that I stand on. But I kind of pushed all those things to the background. So I think I considered myself hiding. But for this first assessment, it was, let's figure out what motivates you. Let's figure out what makes you get up every day. And I must say, the tool that I used at the time was an emotional intelligence assessment, the EQI 2.0 assessment. And Kathy, everything changed from that moment on, because I realized that there was this concept where I was being really professional at work and really amateur at home or in other areas of my life. So I cared about how I showed up for everyone, I guess my paycheck, but I never really had that consistency across life, a consistency of how I would show up for me, I would show up for others, how I'd show up for my family. So this was a great tool that gave me the awareness to emotional intelligence. It was a great tool that gave me the awareness to be consistent in how I'm showing up. And the crazy thing is, for me at least, was that I didn't know what I was getting into. But then for the next few years, I had significant change every year. And every year I took an assessment, and it was different. I was growing, I was changing, I was very, very different. So I moved from the US to Malaysia for a year, and my EQI changed, my emotional intelligence assessment changed. And then I moved to Indonesia, and that changed. And then I moved back home, and it changed again. So I realized that this was kind of my awareness edge. It gave me great information about, this is who I am today, and this is how this combination of behaviors might impact how others are receiving me. I think self-awareness is probably one of the most important things as leaders you should have, because a leader is like the thermostat for the room that they're sitting in, right? Like a lot of times leaders would actually think, and I was trying to figure out, leaders will actually think that everything seems chaotic around me. And chances are is that because you as a leader, you're probably chaotic, and some of the tendencies, under stress, under pressure, you're actually giving those things to the team and as a way of behaving. But I found this really interesting way, and I think I want to put it, as I'm saying my why, I want to share a definition of emotional intelligence that really came up recently, and it ties really well into the Clarity 4D work you've done, right? And it's like, think of emotional intelligence. And by the way, for the audience, I think the same emotional intelligence conversation that we're having, emotions impact or underline every decision that we make every day. A lot of it is relinquished to our subconscious. So when I'm saying it, and what I'm sharing today, and how I want to share this, is that I'm preparing for a conversation at a conference in a few months, and the one big thing that's coming up is the forgetting curve. And Kathy and I talked about this recently, and that is that if we don't think about what we're doing, or even just the audience here, if you don't jot something down connected to your what you're doing in your daily life, what's insightful about it, if you don't capture it in some way, chances are about 50% of us will forget what we heard today in about an hour. And then 70% of us will forget about what we heard today in about 3 days. And you fast forward to a week, and about 90% would forget about what we've heard today. So I'm sharing my story, but I think it's important to connect it to some practical definitions of emotional intelligence and how it shows up. So I would say,
so before we go there, I want to just ground things for the audience here, because I mean, you put out so much good stuff, right? So let's unpack a little bit. You had said you had a professional life and a personal life, and the two personalities, if you were slightly different, right? And so, am I right that you thought you had to show up and meet a certain mold? And
yes.
so this is what leadership looks like, and therefore I need to adapt to meet that mold.
Yes. So, and I want to make sure one of the things that I'm doing is also add the how people receive me to it, right? The joke is that, and a lot of people don't realize it, but I am Black, and I'm 6'1". I want to be 6'4". But a big Black guy showing up, there's so many preconceived notions that people attach to you walking into a room. And for a long time, I was trying to get ahead of what I thought the misconceptions can be of me, right? But no, you have one life, and I think the sooner you can live that life in congruence, that personal and professional life, the more you can show up just as yourself, the more you would have energy to do so many other things in your life.
Yeah, and that's the part I want to make sure that the audience really understands: the power of being self-aware, the power of understanding and having emotional intelligence, is being able to know yourself so that you show up as yourself and you serve others authentically, right? And so that you're not behind a mask.
But I should say one of the crazy things that I am not. I am stumbling. I stumbled on a lot of this, right? So I know, and I'm sure if you don't remember the story, I probably told it to you before. But in Malaysia, I don't take pictures. So back then, there was never a picture of my face in it. It was always out. And for 8 months, I never took a picture. I was always trying to figure out places to hide in the room. And then I took a picture 8 months in, and I realized at 6'1", I was still, way taller than everybody in the room. So no matter where I stood in the room, you were going to see me. So I could try to hide. I can stand in the back. You're still going to see me, right? But I am stumbling upon these things as we go ahead, that you can have these conversations with yourself about yourself that has nothing to do with reality, but it will always pull you back from you being your best self and maybe being the best leader you can possibly be from moment to moment.
Yeah, I love it. So now let's jump into, so what is emotional intelligence for our audience, right? So how do you define it, and how do you think about it when it comes to leadership?
Well, I'm finding a new way to explain it, and I've had my way of doing it, but I think, and I'll go through a few quick different definitions of it. But imagine emotions as colors, and we are the palette, right? We are the painters of it. We all have the basic colors. I think one of the things I talk about in some of my talks is that our emotional bandwidth should be more than happy, mad, and sad, right? Which many people will operate in the world with that lack of awareness. I mean, there's fear, there's joy, there's sadness, there's curiosity, there's excitement. There's a lot of things that are there, but emotional intelligence then will be the ability to blend and mix those colors, understand what they're telling you as you're blending and mixing them, so that you can skillfully use them and create the right pictures to navigate the world. I think that's one of the most interesting ways that I've found of explaining it. But I think another way is simply just noticing your emotions, noticing the emotions of people around you and understanding what they mean, and understanding also that how managing those emotions can help you show up in a way that's congruent with the goals and outcomes that you're seeking, and then just not be led around by them. And when I say led around by them, I mean that every emotion that we have is processed through the same spot in the brain. And then that pause, right? What happens between the impulse and the action that we take, that is the emotional intelligence. So the way that I see it, and another practical way of seeing it, is that Emotional intelligence is managing the conversation between the emotional and rational part of the brain in pursuit of excellence.
Yep, I agree. So we've got John that's sharing here, and welcome, John. We're excited to have you with us. As a leader, I believe it is important to be genuine as a person personally and professionally at work, but also to enable your team to also present their entirety. And I couldn't agree more with you, John. And that's a lot of knowing yourself first, then helps you, in my opinion, help others see themselves, right? So if we don't know ourselves, it's really hard to see others in that way.
So,
So
Kathy, it's interesting that you bring in John up, and when you say you're seeking the awareness, John and I had the same college track coach 30 years apart, and a conversation with John in business school was one of the key things that stopped me from hiding, if you will. Like the biggest things that, the things that are foundational to us, the things that carry us far, they're not always going to get us there where we're going, but there are things about our lives that we should be grateful for. And John was one of the people who reminded me that I should not hide. I should bring all of me into every experience, right? So, John, appreciate you being here.
so as you're saying this, and it's really interesting because you and I spend a lot of time talking about our Clarity 4D profiles, right? And where we get our energies from, and then also the emotional intelligence, the EQI assessments. I want to do you mind if I bring up your profile and mine? And because as you're talking through this and why I think you come from a space that's a little, what's the right word, more reserved, right? Is if you look at our two profiles, I have a lot of high red energy. That's my number one energy. And most people listening typically know that about me. And your number one energy is really the green energy, right? And even the blue energy followed behind it. So if you look at extroverts versus introverted, you and I are complete opposites, right? And
That
so I think,
surprises a lot of people, by the way, that I'm an introvert. And I think it's flexing, but go ahead. Sorry. But it is surprising to many people that I am introverted.
right,
Uh,
and you've had to flex outwards, right? And we talk a lot that this doesn't define you. This doesn't mean you can't be out there on stage talking, building relationships. It just means you get your energy by spending some time with yourself. And as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, I've had to learn how to realize that my high red extroverted energy can be interpreted negatively as well. And so I've had to learn how to dial that back because people are like, oh, you're bossy, you're arrogant, you're just going to tell me what we're going to do. And it's interesting. And this has been the beauty of us sparring for the last 6 years, right? It's how do you draw each other out to, adapt and grow. But it really is so important to start with knowing where you're coming from.
yeah,
And
but
go
that's
ahead.
humanity, right? I think that, like, it's such an important thing that I'm learning is that we can both be standing in the same exact spot and having a very different experience just based on how we perceive the world, right? Or just our experiences. So I think living internationally was the first time that I had to appreciate that. So I have my profile, but I can be on the other side of the world, and that framework that I have may not serve me well. So it's almost like you kind of have to appreciate culture, you have to appreciate people, and understand that we're all different, we're all unique, but then we still have to find those common grounds. So we are very similar in that we are thinking, we do care about the human condition, we do believe that people-centered leadership is important, and then that we can then create, we can do, we can learn, we can be the change that we want to see in the world, right? We can choose. We have the self-awareness that we can choose exactly who we want to be from moment to moment, to gain us that maximal effort, right? Maximum impact.
And from your experience, I've always liked the Clarity 4D because it's kind of a space and time where you get your energy. right? Because our natural energy is where we're going to go in stress. We can stretch, we can do other things, but we're always going to come back to our natural. One of the things with the EQI assessments, and I'd love for you to share a bit more, is that really goes into the details, and it's a very data driven way, right, to understand then how do you show up emotionally and how do you connect with people. Is that a fair interpretation?
It's a very fair interpretation of it, and that's one of the reasons why I really like the tool. My personal preferences and how what I've experienced in the world to date, it is true, it is factual, but it can be a limiting factor, right? If I just pick the box and I put myself in it, then I'm basically done, right?
Mhm.
The emotional intelligence assessment that I use the EQI 2.0. It goes through maybe 5 dimensions with 3 different subscales of each. And what it does, it actually talks about your internal voice. It'll share data on how you perceive yourself, whether or not you're willing to chase the goals that you have. Are you aware? Do you have goals? Are you aware of how you're showing up? Do you know your brand? It talks about, it also assesses the how you would express yourself. So your internal voice, your external voice, how you problem solve, how you manage stress, and then how you think about and cultivate interpersonal relationships. So it gives you many dimensions, and many dimensions that you can then take that self-awareness and apply to your life from day to day. I think one of the biggest commodities as leaders that we have, in probably sometimes the most powerful and also the scarcest at times, is self-awareness as a leadership competency, right? Because we get to a certain point and we think that just the world is going to be just the way we want it to be because we say that it's how it's going to be.
Yep.
So, right?
And so that's why I look at the Clarity 4D as high level. It's a great tool for initial understanding, helping with communications with team members, etc. But the EQI 2.0 really does get into, okay, how do I look at each different component and how do I improve? And it's a scale really set up for improvement.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I think you just shared my profile. Maybe I can just talk a little bit about maybe turn it back around on you and talk about our experience, right? So, think let's go back to 2020 when I was first certified to do this stuff, and you're one of my close friends. You were one of the first assessments that I did. But at the time, you were starting a new business. You were going in a different space, and what we learned was that your internal voice was not necessarily supporting the goals that you had, because you were in that time of change. You were questioning whether or not branching out on your own or doing your own thing, cultivating or creating your own leadership framework, was something that you could actually do. So your internal voice was not necessarily supporting it. At the same time, we actually talked about, as an individual, you didn't have all of the tools to manage stress at the time, right? So those were just 2 big things that we spent that year talking about. And then when you took the assessment a year later, it was a very, very different place. So we saw that incremental growth, that you showed just by working on the competencies, right? So it's not like it wasn't. It was something that was specific to you at that moment of time, and it gave you that awareness, kind of like a gateway into, like, okay, this is the path that I'm on, and how can I get out of my way so that I can really um, chase the goals and dreams that I have, right? So if you go back to what would you love, which is one of the things that you'd always say, is that you would have loved at the time to create this new framework. You were doing it, but in the back of your head, it was actually pulling you back because your that voice that you had to with yourself, that internal voice, the self-regard that you had, and your stress tolerance were not maybe the best things in the world or helpful things in the world.
Yep. And it's interesting as we talk about it, right? Because I'm like, oh, I remember that conversation. Yes. And I did kind of, I was mentally aware, emotionally aware of my tendency of this chatter going on in the back, right? Pulling me back. So that was the difference in the year where I was like, yep, I respect you, you're there, but I'm still moving forward and I'm not going to let you block me. But fast forward now, even 4 years later, I can feel it, it's come back at times, right? So without staying on top of it and keeping it top of mind and working on those emotional elements, you could fall backwards, right? And it's like, oh, I'm thinking I need to do another assessment because it's been a while. So that's my
And I'm
first.
here for it. I'm here for it. But it is in the choice that we make and what we prioritize, right? So, our brain will often default and pull us back to what we feel comfortable and safe with. And there's this really interesting stat on self-awareness, if you will. And if I asked you what percent of the population, you've been doing this, what percentage of the population would say that they're self-aware? What would your estimate be?
I think it's about 70% will admit or think, and I'm going to say think they're self-aware. Or is
Right.
it even higher? Higher?
95%.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. But if you use self-awareness as saying that I understand my current state and I know the action to take next to move from where I am to a more productive space, well, what then do you think that number drops down to?
It's probably 30.
15%.
Yeah.
So that's a delta of like 80%, right? So there's a significant, and I really like how you put it. It gives you the data, the things that you can think about, the things that you should be mindful of, so that between that impulse and the action that you take, you, as John put in the chat, you actually have that power of choice,
Yeah.
right? Of right choice, if you will. So that's kind of, I appreciate you sharing that, because yes, we will go back to the things, the tendencies that we'd have. A lot of times when we're stressed, we go on to autopilot, and and that's kind of like gets us into that death spiral, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And then I learned there's even one more beyond that, right? So you have your natural tendencies and you can adapt. You move on. In stress, you're going to go back to your comfort, right? That's our body. And if you're in ultra stress, and this is one I've learned recently, you go to the opposite corner.
right.
So we talk about you and I being opposite with the green energy, the red energy. I'm guessing when you're super hyper stressed, you start to just tell people what's going to happen, take control because that's your opposite. Whereas I become extremely overly emotional and my red energy stops. Right?
That is so interesting. But I try my best. As I can see, the crazy part is that you can see yourself moving to the next direction, and then you know that there's a point that you should come back to.
Yeah.
So you'll definitely. I think that's the emotional intelligence work. That's the mindfulness work, if you will, in that like things will happen, but you don't have to chase every emotion. You don't have to you don't have to chase every thought, every feeling, right? Yes, we do all operate under that cognitive framework of think, feel, do. But if we stay in any one thing for too long, if we choose to, like, I am this, right? I am angry. We're going to stay exactly in that space for probably longer than we would actually need to be. So we don't always logically decide. We don't always emotionally decide how we feel, but sometimes that logical application of it, we can actually have a framework where we think, where we pause, and where we choose the actions that we will actually take. Right. I think that is important.
Yeah, and Timothy was saying that he loves the concept of emotions as colors. And because I'm not very detail oriented, right? I tend to like bigger concepts. That's why I like the colors as a way to communicate, right? Some of these higher level concepts. So you and I can say, you need to dial up your red, you need to dial up or dial down your green, or vice versa. And then I always look at the emotional intelligence assessment, the EQI 2.0, as going down to that next level of that self reflection and understanding, and then learning where and how you can dial up and really grow to be more emotionally intelligent. And that it really works in conjunction, right? Because it's hard to necessarily go through the assessment. It's very detail oriented, which is great. But I'm like, I can't figure out to see that in someone else.
Well, the crazy part of it is that you can't control someone else, right? So all you can actually do is actually have your awareness and then choose how you would show up. A lot of the things that you've helped me with, Kathy, over the years is creating then that common language for teams to operate in, and then understanding that yes, we can all have, you know, we can all have our own values, right? Think about your E3 leadership workbook. We can all have our own values, but then once we operating as a team, we have to have a shared set of values, right?
Yeah.
We have to have a shared set of, as a leader, it's not just my way is the only way. I will have I will have perspectives that might be different than yours based on my experience, but I still should be a good human being, right? You know, that's one of the things that I think we're forgetting, that with everything that's happening around us, we always have the choice to be a good human being. And I think that is probably where the emotional intelligence stuff comes in. So yes, you can feel a certain way, you can be a certain way at times, but you can still always choose to be something different. And I think the data actually shares that. The data actually shows that, for each of us, it's very, very different. Again, back to where I started, it's almost like a unique fingerprint, right?
Mm.
So yeah, we're all different, but I think that's one of the things that makes us special, right? Going back to why diversity was very, very important. It's not just it's diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of perspectives as well.
Yeah. And the power is when you know yourself, and then you can have this dialogue with someone else, right? So when you and I are talking, well, this is how I prefer to show up, this is what I think about, this is how I react. And you go, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. This is how I like to. Just having that dialogue from a leadership perspective allows you to connect to someone and help inspire and motivate them and enable them to be most successful.
Yeah, and this is a little bit vulnerable, but sharing. We already established that I'm Black, and the challenge was that someone actually said, to me a while ago, gave me feedback that I always wanted to be right, right? And I thought I was like, no, but I'm curious. I ask questions. I often look for the blind spots. And then I actually stopped back and I said, oh, I get it. I think I was measuring, 5 times and cutting once. And then I actually shared with this person, and it was probably one of those breakthrough moments, at least for me in my career and some of the relationship that I have with my staff, is that I actually shared with them. I was like, hey, I don't know if you ever appreciated it, but I'm a Black man, and there's a certain amount of a different expectations that will come for it. And then one of the things I said, I apologize. One of the things that's always playing in the back of my head is that I won't have a chance to make mistakes. Like, I am going to be punished for the mistakes that I will make. I can look at my colleagues and they can half-ass it as much as they would want, but I am held to a different standard, a higher standard. Mind you, I could have been creating this all myself, but I'm held to a different standard. And I actually admitted to them, I was like, it probably to you, it feels that I always want to be right, but in my head, I can't afford to be wrong. And those two things look just alike to you where you're
Mm.
sitting in it, right? And if I never shared this with you, and I was like, maybe we wouldn't have that be able to have a conversation that would move us forward. So now then I could make sure that I am meeting you in the middle where I'm not measuring 5 times. We're going to be precise in the decision making. We're going to feel comfortable with our way forward, but we can accept that they might be mistakes and we're not perfect. So we can actually operate from that space of common understanding of each other.
Well, and then with that, did that provide you both the ability to have a conversation and say, hey, Nigel, can we just cut twice, or measure twice here in this scenario? Like you start to create that common language, right? And hold each other accountable and ask questions and push back a little bit.
Yep, it is, right? So I often say that for my team is like, if you're in the room and you don't have an opinion and you don't feel like you should have a voice, then you shouldn't be in the room. So you're here because we want your experiences, we want your perspective, not just your perceptions. Like perceptions are just the emotions. We're not going to chase just your emotions, but we want you to apply your experiences, your knowledge, to that, to that framework, that cognitive framework that we're actually doing. So yes, I agree with you, but I think that that's the richness of leadership. It is about bringing out the best in everyone, right? We all playing different roles on the team, but it is bringing out the best in everyone to help us chase the goals that we have, right?
Yeah, I was talking to, I've had some really good conversations this week with a number of different CEOs at different levels. And the thing that keeps coming back now is the importance of trust in the organization, in the team, with individuals you're working with. And it's interesting. It's not just about how hard you work or how you prioritize. It's how you get along with other people, how much you can trust someone. And when a lot of people used to say, oh, emotional intelligence, that's just fluff. That's a nice to have. But what the CEOs know now is that is the most important thing to help drive success. Have
Agreed.
you seen the same thing with folks you're working with?
It's really interesting. I think now with all the change, there was some study I saw, and I can't remember exactly, but it was saying that 60% of our performance is related to emotional intelligence competencies going forward. Because of all the issues that we have around stress and change and the layoffs and the inability to be adaptable. I think the studies show that only 23% of employees are engaged. About 60% are just, showing up. And the next remaining part of that population is pulling or going in the other direction.
Actively disengaged, right?
Yeah, those are the ones that are creating the toxic culture. And I think toxic culture is 10 times more likely to drive attrition than compensation. But, I think one of the things that I drive is I try to work on driving engagement. And engagement is emotional. And when I say engagement, I should step back and say engagement meaning discretionary effort, right? Someone who will actually show up and give effort above what they're being paid for, right? I can just go in and do the job that I'm doing, but engagement is thinking of how we can be better, like thinking about working well with your employees, working well with your coworkers. And it's interesting that engagement is emotional. It's not procedural. And I'm learning more and more that people don't disengage from the work that they're doing. They disengage from how the work that they're doing makes them feel. And a large part of how you feel about the work that you're doing is the leadership. Back to that temperature is the leadership framework and the culture of the organization. So back to the palette that it is, that the culture is the collective emotional palette of the organization, if you will, right? The things that is just acceptable as you move through the day. Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree. But I don't believe I back to that 75% people who are saying they know what it is, that 95% have the awareness, right? and 15%. So many leaders are saying it, but the pace of change and how long it is and how impactful the change is being now. I don't believe many leaders are equipped or even thinking about how they will actually invent in how they will actually move the needle on the cultural differences that's going to be necessary to keep us moving forward. And I think the last thing I'd say on that is with the pace of change, the introduction of AI and a lot of the other things, it said that many of our skills are going to become obsolete in the next 5 years. But so many of what we're doing now, it's actually entrenched in what we've done in the past. So the self-awareness exercise would be, what are the key competencies that you have? What are those things that you do well? And then if we're thinking about moving from industry 4.0 to industry 5.0, or this integrated living that we'll be doing with AI, are those competencies and those traits, are they going to serve us well for the next iteration of who we would need to be successful in our work and our life?
And it really is, emotional intelligence is going to be the number one skill. And people often, their fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and you talked about it, throughout this whole thing, we let that block us so often. And so you said to me, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable here. That's what's necessary, right? And
Yeah.
how do you go about that? And how do you be vulnerable? Because you have to be deliberate about it. And you have to do the self-reflection work first and foremost.
Yeah, it is, right? And you know what? One of the things I like from awareness, and I think sometimes the individuals will actually, I mentioned AI, and it's one of the things that I'm obsessed now about. And when I say obsessed, I think it's permeating so many different things. It presents an opportunity for us, but many of us are seeing it as a threat and not leading into it. So, back to the framework that we're talking about, how we're painting the colors, the emotional part of it. If I was to, a lot of us are afraid of AI, and might be just change, but change is constant, right? So if we think about an emotional intelligence competency that we would actually think here, if I was to ask you just something that's, when do you think the autopilot in planes were invented, right? If I was to ask that question, we talk about AI and change. What would you guesstimate? What would you estimate?
I think it's probably a good 15 years it's been since originally developed. No?
Originally, well, the altimeter, which is the basis of it, was developed in 1917.
Oh,
100 years later, the like pilots are still flying the plane,
the
even if you've got
autopilot
it.
thing.
Right, right,
Gotcha. Yeah.
right. So the idea is that even as we think about AI, and we think of AI as a thought partner, or not starting ever starting with a blank sheet of paper. If you embrace it, AI can handle the thinking of it, but humans are still at the center of execution. And then we're now required for leadership to be more human, to bridge that gap, because AI is not going to bridge the gap, right? So emotional intelligence is is that opportunity for, as AI gets better, for leadership to become more human, not less. I think that is how I've been thinking about it recently. When you start shaping the opportunities that change presents us, rather than the things that it's actually taking away from us, right?
Yeah. I mean, as a leader, you have a choice. You can use fear, you can use directive, right? You can use pressure to drive performance and get something done. Um, but you're only going to get so far. It's a limited space of where you can get to with that, because it's not ongoing. It's not sustainable. At some point, people are going to be like, I'm out, I'm done, I'm not engaged, I'll do the bare minimum. It's the human side that drives that performance of people, right? I don't know if, have you been part of a team where there was trust, um, human first, people first leadership, and you still worked a lot of hours, but you felt good, you walked away feeling good?
Oh, yes. And it's one of the things that I've tried to create for my teams as much as possibly can, right? Like go do the things that you need to do to feel that life is full for you. Um, so that this work portion of it, you don't feel that it's stealing or robbing you of your life, right? So that's that. And I hate saying balance, but I think it's the effectiveness, because if you there's no world where we will just do as we can show up every day, do the same thing, and just go home, and we'll probably move forward as if we're kind of rising to meet the challenges that we would have, right? So there are some times when we'll have to work late, but that should never stop you from going to your kids' baseball game or basketball game. And I found that if you create enough space for living a full life within your daily whatever vocation it is, I think you can get more engagement, more discretionary effort.
Yeah, because you're thinking different. Like, I mean, I've seen it. You said toxic environment and why people leave. It's draining. It sucks the living daylights out of you, right? And your team spends more time complaining than doing.
There's this concept called ego depletion, and it's the idea. I don't know if you've ever been to work and you go home and you like, I want to work out, and as soon as you sit down on the couch, you're like I don't want to move anymore. So as we go through the day, like the things that push up against us emotionally. So for instance, I meet with Kathy this morning. I'm like, what the hell is Kathy talking about? Did she trying to insult me or whatever else? Like again, like, and like that managing that takes away from your energy at the day. So there's this emotional meter that we have that we often don't pay attention to. But you can just be sitting in a meeting and thinking that the entire meeting is bullshit, and the entire time that you're going, this is bullshit, this is bullshit, this is bullshit, you're actually digging an emotional hole for yourself that actually will drain your energy. So when you move from that to a next experience, you won't be able to see the opportunities that are there because you're in a different mental space, right? So that's why, and I know we had talked about it before, when we are having some of our meetings, we would start with, what are you grateful for? What one of the things that you would smile for? Because to me, that helps drive the engagement. It gets us in a better place mentally, which skews our performance positively as well. But there are so many leaders who refuse to do something that simple, right? Or we're here just to talk about these tasks rather than to start with the human condition and then operate from there. We spend way too much time at work for it to be as miserable as some people try to make it.
Yeah, because in the boot camp, one of the first things we do is clean the slate, right? What's all the things going on in your head? What's the fear, the uncertainty, everything, so that you clear all that off so that you can come and show up with, this is my intention. This is what I want to get out of this. And this is why I want to be here. It changes the entire mood and focus of a meeting, of an interaction. And it's a powerful tool for emotionally intelligent leaders, and one
Yeah,
that we need to do more.
I
So,
totally agree. And I think that gets you back to the a yes without a how is a no, right? And I think that's what ties into the emotional, the E3 leadership profile and the stuff that you would actually do, that, those things actually help. I was on a call on Monday, and one of the individuals had a problem, but he didn't know how. He didn't know what the next step would have been to actually change the trajectory of whatever he was experiencing or whatever his team was experiencing. So,
yeah, I want to go back to, Yev had asked a question, and it kind of relates to what we were just talking about now as well. Does the emotional intelligence of those around us influence our own emotional intelligence? And is that a bad thing? What's your
it's one of the
thoughts?
things. It's one of the things I still wrestle with, right? Because I I had a really interesting experience with a leader in the very recent past where um, they were operating in this space of, if it was not their idea, it's not a good idea, you know?
Mm.
Or this was someone who came into a meeting at one point and says, I have no specific technical expertise on this topic. I didn't read the report that you presented for this, but these are my thoughts. So we all have triggers. And those are the things, like, if you're not curious, if you're not kind, if you're not self-aware, like, those are the things that are the triggers that I'm still working on. So you have, yes, the emotional intelligence or the lack of emotional intelligence of many other people would actually impact you at times. But, I think one of the emotional intelligence competencies is impulse control and problem solving. And so if you are low on those things, it's easy to react rather than respond to certain situations that are charged. It's easier to bypass what's actually happening in the moment. So, one of the things that I say, even if we're triggered, we're actually going to make the best decisions at the time to move us forward. And we're going to then come back later and talk about the issues that we've had so it doesn't actually happen again. So yes, it happens. It's something that I'm working on myself, because you can't, you can only control what you're experiencing. You're going to have no control over what your peers or other individuals that you interact with are working through. So it does impact you, but it is still an opportunity with that awareness to work with that person, understand, to have follow-up conversations rather than taking it personally, to actually then ask for certain behaviors, certain traits, certain responses from those individuals, so that those things don't spill over into the next interactions that you have. It's also interesting, Kathy. I think the start of a meeting is important, but I think we run from meeting to meeting and we don't ever pause to orient ourselves or shift ourselves from one item to the next. So yeah, it's probably important to realize that sometimes the things that you're experiencing are not necessarily you. That person could have probably come from another meeting, showed up to your meeting late, missed the introduction that you have, talking about something that you have and think they're helpful, and then undermine the current meeting, right? So it's just it's something that can be worked on, and it's fair to say that the emotional intelligence or lack of emotional intelligence of others will impact yours at times. But
And I think yeah, and to follow on, everything you said is absolutely spot on. I think the big change that has helped me is not to take things personally and not to assume it's always something I did, because that's my upbringing, right? Of taking on it's my fault, everything is about me, but turning the table and saying, wait a minute, what else is going on in your life? Because if we assume no one wakes up with bad intent and they're not showing up in the best way we see or need, asking, are you okay? Right? And that diffuses things very quickly. So if someone shouts at you, says something that you don't agree with, is everything okay? Is there something else going on you want to talk about? And that can diffuse a scenario because we own how we want to show up. And I love that impulse control because that is really important. And I think that one went up on my EQI in the year.
it is, because I kept like pushing you on that one. John just put a really interesting one in the chat. He shared that a business meeting is similar to an athletic competition. Arriving, you need to properly warm up and orient to the event, and that is so important. But a lot of leaders don't necessarily do that, because I think from an emotional intelligence perspective, many leaders don't see themselves as part of a team. They see themselves as leading a team, which is very, very different, right? You can't lead the team unless you're part of the team. So, so the coach is part of the team. I like the soccer. I like the soccer, maybe even field hockey, just to put it closer to your world. the soccer field, like we're all on the same team, but have very different roles. And the only way for us to be successful is that we all have to be pushing in the same direction, right? Going in the same direction.
Spot on. Absolutely. Well, Nigel, we went way over what I normally because we could talk all day.
Great. Yeah.
Um,
I'm grateful for this opportunity, though. Thank you so much to let me create the space for me to geek out about just how important self-awareness is and how big of an opportunity EQ is to turn awareness into something actionable.
Yeah, I'm agreed. And so I appreciate it because the way we look at it is the emotional intelligence amplifies what you have to do as a leader. It's the center of everything. You know, you're responsible for the strategy, the people, and the execution, but at the heart of it is the emotional intelligence. And that's the leaders that get ahead. So I'll leave you with a stat, and you talked about 23% are engaged, et cetera. Less than 30% of leaders actually accomplish their goals. It could be as low as 8%, depending on what numbers you're looking at. But let's just say in general, less than 30%. It's because they follow a formula, and it's because they're emotionally intelligent. And those are the leaders that are going to get ahead. So, Nigel, thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so glad you forgave me from that first time we met, and I thought you would never speak to me again. So I'm fortunate of all these years of working together and sparring. I know I want to get
as we're leaving, you should tell the audience what you did on that first day. But it was also an opportunity to say what John said, to show more of me than hi, right? So maybe, as you're closing, you should tell everyone what you said to me on that oh so special day in October of 2019.
I don't want to dismiss an entire state, so.
Oh, wow. Not New Jersey. Don't go after New Jersey. It's okay. I will protect you then.
Fair enough. But, I know I want to get a new EQI 2.0 assessment done. Where can our audience learn more about this and potentially work with you to have an assessment done?
So meinghelp.com. That's actually a great place to do it. Or drop me a note at Nigel@meinghelp. Would be more than happy to help or just talk about, share more on what we've talked about today. There's a bunch of tools that you can have. I think also a good plug for if you wanted some of these similar conversations, there's a podcast, the Me Inc. podcast, that kind of explores a lot of what we're talking about and how different individuals are meeting life and showing up as their best selves, right? So more insights on that. So Nigel at Me Inc. Help, Nigel Franklyn Way on Instagram. Just any way that there's so many ways that we can connect, but I would love to chat more with anyone who's curious about being better.
Great. We'll put that information in the chat and the comments so you can follow up with Nigel as well. And again, Nigel, thank you so much for joining. This was so much fun. And thank you to our audience. Thank you for all your questions. It was great to interact with you all. I hope you enjoyed this and have a great weekend and a lovely holiday season. We do have one more Voices of Leadership session next week, and it's going to be focused on how to prioritize your work. So we have a gentleman that wrote the book on how to learn to say no in order to prioritize better. So,
absolutely.
Thanks so much, all. Have a great one.
I put a suit on for you today.